Howdy ho, friends and foes, and welcome to Dads on Life, your weekly episodic show about parenting from a male perspective. I'm your host, Jay Miles, and with me, as always, are my co-host, Keith Bogan.
Good morning, sir.
Doug Hamadike.
Morning.
And Chad Holloway.
Good morning.
Today, we are actually on our 69th episode, which ironically kind of has a little bit of a coincide of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about war and how you deal with it with your kids. Obviously, we had a big thing in 1960, in the late 1960s, early 1970s with Vietnam, of how the media deals with war that exposed what was really going on in Vietnam. So we're kind of going to, as I said last week, we may or may not be, I believe we are, but it could always change. Something could happen at the 11th hour that we might be heading towards World War III. That's the general thing. We've been in this position before. We've heard, that we were marching towards World War III. And for all intent and purposes, World War III could very well have turned up off of 9/11. It didn't, but we'll get into that. Who wants to kick this off? Doug, does your ceiling fan want to start?
Yeah, I had to do something for a second, obviously. I really don't know where to go here, but it's a very interesting subject. I can't say that it necessarily came up in the context of the Ukraine, as we're, I guess, trying to keep it topical. But it was interesting that Colin, my youngest, brought up today that they were talking in class, and they mentioned the movie Swing Kids. And I was like, wow, in reference to what? And he doesn't really understand the gravity of the movie. And I remember that there's some very intense moments in that movie where people start to realize what is going on and what they're doing. And how to explain that to your kid about how monstrous and evil people can be is just, it's hard to it's easy to say to somebody, how evil somebody could be, but to explain the atrocities and what happens during a war. And last night it was like I was looking and I saw an article on the lady on the red carpet and at Cannes, and that the image of it and the idea of what she was speaking out against was just terrible. If you got time to look, I mean, she came out as a loon, but at the same time it's like, wow, what goes on in people's heads, even the people that are just marching out the orders is just as bad as the people giving them sometimes. And how to if you really wind up in the weeds with your kids on some of these subjects, it's hard because you have to explain to them the backstory and what's going on internally, more than just the treetop view, or the 5,000 foot view, which is easy because you can say, oh, well, this was in the news and this is what's going on. But when you hear about some of the little things going on, that's a real besides wordsmithing, just being able to communicate with them on their level, I think, is the most difficult part.
I would agree with that.
Go ahead.
And I was going to say, I haven't talked to Frankie a lot about war. I think that he just came out and visited us in Georgia for about 10 days. And, we talked a little bit about the Ukraine, but, kind of his feeling is kind of like mine. Like now there's so many wars. We've come so far technologically that it's almost like the people can be engaged in war and not really understand the implications, from our perspective, because, it's somebody driving a drone, flying a drone, and, it's easy to, it's depersonalized that part of the thing. Whereas I think in World War I and II, you were looking somebody in the eyes and using your bayonet or whatever. I mean, it's a whole different deal with that, with the hand to hand. But I remember when he was younger and I was trying to teach him about kind of the idea of war, and, you know, they'd play army and stuff like that. And it's kind of, you know, it's a fun game when you're a kid, but then I'm like, well, you know, I'm kind of explaining, well, you know, if this were really war, it's not so much fun because, you know, other people are coming after you. And certainly if you're the victor and nothing happens to you, that's great. But many people die. And, you know, I kind of went through that whole process of explaining that, but also explaining that sometimes it is necessary. And I used Hitler as an example, you know, where we have somebody who wants to kill somebody else, kill another group of people, and who killed, you know, 6 to 8 million folks pretty easily without the world going in too quickly. So, you know, I recognize that at this point, you know, and I think he does as well, that, you know, it's just like in your personal life. If you see somebody picking on somebody else, it's time to say, hey, enough. It's the same on the world stage as well. You see one country going in to pick on somebody else, you know, it's just another incidence of bullying, but potentially with much greater sacrifice at hand. So anyway, we've kind of talked about it different ways, but we haven't talked about World War III because I think, again, it's gonna be somebody pushing a button and, you know, we might hear a siren or something, but then I think, you know, that's it. There's no hiding under school desks or whatever. I don't think anymore, you know, it's just, if that happens. But I do think that since I think he has some sort of cancer now, they suspect. So I'm wondering how that's impacting both his mental state, Putin's mental state, as well as his decisions to, if he says, oh, I'm going to die anyway, so I've got nothing to lose.
That's been rumored for a few weeks now. That I don't think it's a rumor either. I think you might be right. I think he's sick and losing the fact that he just doesn't give a shit at this point. It's interesting that you brought up Hitler. I'm sure he will be probably a top interesting topic of conversation here, as he has been, you know, the Holocaust in the past. Around when your children, right before when your children were born, Keith and Chad, you talked about, without saying the word, talked about genocide. There was the genocide in Bosnia and Serbia during that war as well, going on a little bit prior to their births, but not much. I mean, it was 96, 97. So when all that started really going on. So yeah, it's the old saying of if you don't, history is doomed to repeat itself. So yeah, it's still going on, sadly, with the genocides and Rwanda and all kinds of things like that. We've seen it along the way in our lifetimes as well. It's just kind of, we as a country, it kind of, for us, seems to be not in our backyard. So as where we stood
Funny
up
you
for,
should
you know,
say that. It's very interesting. It's not funny you should say that. It's very interesting you should say that, because I just spent the last 4 or 5 days with both of my sons. And a lot of these topics did come up. But as you say, Doug, in an effort to keep it topical, we didn't talk very much about Ukraine, because there were two predominant threads that came out of our conversations. One were my frustration that the #1 news story in this country is not Ukraine, it's Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. But that gives you a flavor of what people are willing to talk about and listen, and they're less interested in confronting the possibility that people are dying by the tens of thousands overseas. And this is something I talked about very intensely with my sons. They're much more interested in Hollywood bullshit than they are in talking about the fact that there's a true war going on overseas. But if you ask my sons about the war, they wouldn't talk first about Ukraine. They'd acknowledge it, but they wouldn't talk about it first, because to them, the war that they believe is about to happen and we're literally on the edge of it, is the domestic war with all the domestic terrorism. Now, I'm going to throw out the expression replacement theory, And we could have a whole other show on that if you want to. But that was a big part of the conversation and the disgust they felt about what that sort of thing being put into the public stream. But the fact that they thought that was going to lead to war here in terms of civil war very, very soon, because it's becoming, as the domestic terrorism explodes, it's growing so quickly. They felt that we're really on the edge of things exploding here, and it was the predominant war in their thoughts, and Ukraine the second. And they didn't think we were doing enough for Ukraine either, by the way, and I tend to agree with that. But these were extraordinarily topical conversations for them, near and dear to the heart. And they, of course, they know more because they're really good at, and I'm sure Frankie's good at this too, digging into the non-mainstream media and really going underground and pulling up the stuff that the mainstream media doesn't talk about. Which I admit I'm not very good at. I don't have as much time as they do to do that sort of thing. So they have all sorts of information that I don't have. I mean, it is very, very foremost on their brains.
Yeah, I was also thinking that we also like to teach our kids a lot about respect and history. And it's interesting that this one comes up. Yesterday was Armed Forces Day. I think at the end of the month, we have Memorial Day. And those are very important things that we like to teach and talk to our kids about. And what?
You think we have Memorial Day?
I know. I mean,
wait, Jason, it's so
I
bad.
participated.
It's so bad that I just now put two and two together. All of the Major League Baseball teams were wearing military hats yesterday.
You're fucking kidding me. You
I had
didn't
no
realize
idea. I
that
thought
was
I was like,
Memorial
are
Day.
they doing that for the whole month or something? What is that?
Holy shit. Memorial Day is next Monday.
It's next
Yeah.
Monday, but why would they do it this early? You know, we're talking a week away. Or are they doing it for like 5 days or something like that?
Because they market the hats.
No,
They're-
I get that. But were they doing it for Memorial Day, or were they doing it yesterday for Armed Forces? Or,
Probably Armed Forces
Because-
Day.
I had no idea what yesterday was. That's how bad it is.
Both. And they do it because and this is off topic, but this is a big sales time. This
Of course,
and
yeah.
4th of July are big sales time for Major League Baseball. They sell a shit ton of hats and they sell a shit ton of jerseys for between Memorial Day and Labor Day. They sell a shit ton of and the All-Star game, a shit ton of merchandise. And it starts with the military hats that are sold over the next couple of weeks.
All right.
Up now to Memorial Day, they'll sell a shit ton of the Army hats. Or
So Doug and Chad,
military
I want Jason to define what shit ton means. That's for Linda, by the way. We got to make.
I've been to baseball games during, like now. I was at a Yankee game a couple of years ago, and it was right around I think it was like Memorial Day week, right before like Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday before Memorial Day. And everywhere you turned in Yankee Stadium, all you saw was the green hats, was the military hats. There was a lot of them that were sold that day. And apparently I said to somebody, I said, wow, I said, you guys are selling a lot of hats today. He goes, we always sell a lot of hats. He said, but he said, we sell a lot between now and 4th of July. He said the ones with the American flag in the New York emblem, he goes, we run out of them for the day within, pretty quickly. So they sell a lot. I mean, you got to think, how many hats do they produce? And if they're selling out of them, that tells you something. And now
Anyway.
back on topic.
So Doug thinks there's Memorial Day coming up.
Well, you know what? We should send out historians to verify that first. So let's do a little research.
I should text my brother-in-law and ask him, but I think he's on his way to a softball game. Actually, I tried getting him to come on today. He would have actually probably been crying right now. He's a history teacher. He probably would have been crying.
Doug, do you remember what you were talking about when you were so rudely interrupted?
Oh no, I just it was just a totally different offshoot. Just was saying how much we I think we spend a lot of time with our kids and talking about respect and all, and just how this episode actually came up. When Armed Forces Day was yesterday, and we have Memorial Day coming up, and, uh, and just how important those factors are as well that tie into war. But sometimes we don't put together, necessarily. I mean, it's definitely respectful and all, but to think about actually what has got on that in these people's lives and all when being part of a war and or just a military person protecting the country in case of war, just how that plays into a lot of this. But just like I said, once again, until you get really into it more than the just the remembrance part, it's it's really hard to explain to younger kids, let's say, where my kids are and Jason's two girls are.
Well, actually, Delana is. We went to dinner with my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law was here with my nephew yesterday. My my sister-in-law had to go to went to Delaware to have brunch with her friends. But they were talking about, because Delana's learning about World War II in school right now, in history. She's learning about World War II. So that was a topic of conversation at the dinner table last night. And it kind of dawned on me, in the last couple of minutes that we're talking about Remembrance and Memorial Day here, which wasn't the point of the topic, but we are in a weird period because we're coming into a time where the people we're losing in this country now at the highest rate are World War II veterans. A lot of them are gone now. We are just like we did, like our parents did, and their parents did during their lifetimes, losing the World War I veterans. We will, in our lifetime, see the last of maybe the last of the World War II veterans pass away. So it's this for all intent and purposes right now, at least if there isn't one, it will be the last time that there are any World War veterans left. But we hopefully, like I said, the hardest thing to talk about is, I mean, part of the problem is there's people who don't realize how far back this thing with Russia and the Ukraine goes. This has been going on for a decade in that region. Pretty much ever since the civil war in the Ukraine, where they deposed the pro-Russian president, Putin has come in and tried to strong arm everybody over there. Crimea, there's been 2 regions where it's been invaded. And actually, I had mentioned that he seems to like to do things like this during the Olympics because his 2 previous invasions of the Ukraine, the Olympics were going on. One was in Russia. Now this is the 3rd one where it's been this kind of situation. So we're heading towards a very interesting time here. Because my brother-in-law actually calling just now. I had asked him something. So somebody take this for a second, and I was trying to get a quote that he
Well,
said
I'm much more interested in the cat right now, but this is one of the menagerie that Doug has up there, I'm sure.
There's a stroking. Never mind.
Well,
Never
but Jason, you bring up a very interesting point, and again, I think, and this goes right back to parenting. We can reel ourselves back into dads on life, if you will. Most people have no idea this is a decades-old conflict. Most people only know what the news cycle tells them, and the news cycle knows that the American public has no appetite for history. They don't care about that. They only care about what's happening right now. So most people, if you ask them, would say, oh yeah, this Putin guy, he just got itchy a few weeks ago and he decided to attack Ukraine. And because the news doesn't report about all the historical stuff that's been going on. And if whatever little they did report on way back when, people have forgotten. But our kids, and I'm going to specifically point to people like Frankie and Justin and Jeremy in particular, are the kind who dig and who are pretty well versed in this stuff, and they're knowledgeable enough to know some of, not all of it, but some of the history. And Doug, don't sell your kids short, because they're at that age where they're probably picking into a lot of the social media and looking. They don't necessarily know which sources yet to really rely on as much, but they're I'm sure they're pretty sharp there. And it's very interesting that the emphasis is on today's conflict without explaining where it came from. In every conflict, it's really important to know where it came from, and our media, in right, left, whatever, none of it does that. You're muted, but Jason, could you stay that way? No, don't come off mute. Stay that way.
My brother-in-law said yesterday, there's a diplomatic way out of every situation when it comes to a war. It's the people that choose to go to war. So,
is it fair to say that one person chose to go to war in Ukraine, and this is on one person's head, or is there actually other people involved in this history here?
oh, there's others involved in Russia, but it is largely kind of revolves around one person who decided, I'm going to go blow them up, and I want that part of this back in our country. But or it's just like you said, he's dying and he said, fuck it, I'm going to ruin everybody else's life too.
So the question I ask you is the American public more consumed with the concept of what's going on in Ukraine, or the domestic terrorism and the ugly rise of interesting theories in this country, and which is more on the plate of consumption for the American public?
There's been these ugly theories. You say the rise of ugly theories. There's been these ugly theories in our lives for a very, very long time.
Absolutely. I mean, it's since the beginning of time, but now it's got words, and now it's finally hit the media. The media is finally talking about it.
Yeah, they've been talking about it all along. I mean, you gotta go back to the Branch Davidians. It started with that. Timothy McVeigh largely did what he did because he believed in what David Koresh was doing. That's what started Timothy McVeigh going off. Was David Koresh? He was a Koreshian.
Unless I miss my guess, the expression replacement theory only hit the mainstream media within the last few months.
You are right about that.
That gave life to it, whereas we've all known about white people's discrimination in this country forever. We've known about it, but once you give it a name and it gives it life, and people can attach themselves to it. In the same sense that a lot of other ugly things, Doug and Chad, don't respond to this. A lot of other ugly things finally started taking off that were always there when 45 decided to start giving it life, giving it name. This is the same thing. Now it's got a name, people can attach to it and run with it like a train.
The problem is that, there's misinformation on the other side as well. If you really look into,
Oh, on
the
both sides, of
replacement
course.
theory. I mean, it is a very, let's say there's a lot of information about it that is not replacement theory out there, which now the media is just going to run with. Everything is replacement theory, you know. But
I was
anyway, that's something.
I
That's
was
something
actually
else
gonna
to
say this,
argue.
and Doug and Chad were probably going to have, Doug may have had a heart attack when I said this, but let's not point the finger at 45. Let's not start pointing fingers at presidents in this country right now, because it's not,
No.
they're not the problem right now. But it's not, because there's an old saying of when you point a finger at someone else, there's three pointing back at you. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the hugest fan either, but I'm just saying, you know, following what Keith has been saying, the information that's out there, a lot of things now all of a sudden seem like everything is replacement theory when it's not.
yes.
But
Now, another thing, Chad, you mentioned you're in Barranquilla today, or
Mhm.
this. There's a lot going on down there, isn't there?
There is, they have elections coming up next weekend. And Anna was saying, I hope everything's okay. And I'm like, what do you mean you hope everything's okay? And she says, well, because sometimes they'll bomb the election, the places where you vote, the election areas. So I'm like, well, okay, well, let's still go to that. but I guess related to the Ukraine, here the people don't really hear too much about it. It's kind of, they're not involved, and that's the thing that I have talked to her about is, what is your knowledge of history over like World War II? Well, she really doesn't have that much because they weren't involved. Columbia didn't have a big role in that, so it's not part of their history really. It's part of the world history, but it's not part of the Columbian history.
Well, part of
When
it is that they're also not importing oil from that region. They're importing oil from Venezuela. So there's a big part of why they may not care.
Yeah. But I think some of the things that we've talked about, like I've watched some shows with her, and I'm trying to kind of give her an appreciation of the history, trying to kind of bring her up to speed, if you will, on some of the history that we have out there. And she just finished right within the last week, The Diary of Anne Frank. And she was like, she goes, I love that book. I bought it for her in Spanish. And she's like, I love that book. She goes, Anne Frank, she goes, see, she's quite the personality, and was like talking about all these things and how there's some boys she liked and all this stuff. And, but then we talk about like how it ends and, what happened to her. And we had watched some of that stuff actually before. And that's kind of what had sparked this conversation about that. So she's getting there. And I think she's understanding a lot more. But, when we look at kind of this cross-cultural thing, they've had a civil war going on here for the last 60 years, all these competing groups, the guerrillas and the far left and the far right, and kidnappings, and, everybody's dealing cocaine to make money for their side. And there's more than one, I guess there's more than one side though, here. So
There's more than two sides.
There's more than two sides. But it's just interesting. And then trying to get Valentina up to speed on some of this stuff as well. So, it's just been interesting, and to the point about history does play such an important role in this, and understanding what happened and why people did the things, and I think, if we look back to the Cold War and what Putin's trying to do, I think he has a lot of love for the way things used to be in the Soviet Union, and would like to see that back together because he thinks that's the superior way, but I don't think that's going to happen for him.
No,
I'm sort of curious, and we can
You're
learn
right.
a lot from Anna in particular, but Valentina as well. When you look at the U.S., there's a far left and a moderate left, and there's a moderate right, and there's a far right. There's radical, there's conservative, there's a midstream, whatever. There's a bunch of different. Much like anywhere else, there's not just two sides. Does someone like Anna look at what we do here and say, why aren't they just shooting at each other? Why aren't they just dealing cocaine and trying to kill each other? How do you manage to maintain relative peace when there's so many competing thoughts? Because all she would know from being in Colombia is, well, we shoot each other when we disagree. Does she ever look at our way and say, how is it possible that nobody or relatively few people raise arms?
No, we haven't talked about that, but I think, speaking on her behalf, I would say that she sees the US as very peaceful, and some of the stuff that, where we fight about these things amongst ourselves, I think she thinks are, I don't want to say,
Trivial.
yeah.
But they are, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, yeah.
Be honest, trivial.
'cause-
Yes, she's right.
Yeah. Yep. And because the thing here, it's like, food today, food tomorrow, how we eating, and when I think back, to when they came to the US, they filled up 2 suitcases and that's all they had. I mean, that's everything they had. There wasn't paperwork for assets or other big things, or we didn't need to call movers to move stuff in container ships up to the US. It's just what they had there, and that's all they need. So I guess it is. It is. And sometimes I come down here because I'm isolated more from the press, so I don't hear all the stuff. So kind of gets me grounded again.
I know, speaking to my wife, when her family decided to come here, I know, like a similar situation to Keith. There's only a fairly small percentage of them that actually made it here. So that tells you a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Yeah, and she's right about it being trivial. You can say it. I mean, don't try to sugarcoat it. You don't have to sugarcoat anything.
Mhm.
We know it is. It doesn't stop us from arguing about it, but we know a lot of what we argue about to an extent is first world problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let me ask you one question. You said she read Anne Frank. Did you show her Schindler's List yet?
I have not.
I mean,
And
obviously-
I think I searched that and it didn't have Spanish translations. So
Obviously,
I
there
think
was
that was.
a lot of glossing over of certain things by Hollywood, but it's still, somewhat historically accurate.
Oh yeah.
And another, there was an election in Australia within the last couple of days, and I have a friend, pretty good friend, who lives in Australia, who's Australian. Things are about to get real interesting there too, so keep your eye out for that one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess let me just throw this in. So one of the things that came out when I was talking to Frankie is he says I'm just not interested in politics anymore. He said it just, and not that he ever had a huge affinity for it, but he says all it is he says people are just going after each other in the United States. Nobody wants to say we're Americans, what's the best thing for the US. He says, I'm kind of out of it. He says it's not productive. It's not worth my time for this.
And
kind
that
of
is
stuff.
what, and not to go down the political rabbit hole, but that is what those battling for certain things count on, is the attrition of most people getting sick of it and falling to the wayside, so that the only people left are the ones in combat, if you will. And then they feel that they can prevail in whatever topic they are in. And my sons are, I think they're still in the anger phase where they don't want to get involved in the politics, but they're not ready to just give up and not care anymore. But they too, I mean, they're only a little bit younger than Frankie. They too it doesn't take much to get to that point where, well, I can't really affect anything. No matter what I say, my candidates don't seem to get elected. No matter what I say, people keep doing the same stupid things. So why should I bother? I'm just going to go live my life. And each of our kids in turn will get to that point, unless they, happen to be amongst the fortunate few that has some impact, if you will.
But here's my question: is how does one impact this as an individual? I mean, what I hear is, Frankie told me a couple of stories like where somebody was going after somebody else, and he said, "Hey, why don't you knock that off?" and kind of short circuited something, kind of in his real life. That like when you got this thing, and I think this whole deal now, with some of these groups, like I don't see groups acting. I see crazies. I see individual crazies out there acting. You know, like the thing up in New York with the guy shooting up the supermarket. There were tons of red flags, and I don't think anybody took notice. And I think he could have been stopped. He should have been stopped.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in the system. He had people talking to him. And but then again, I think that's kind of where things are going, is people are making mistakes now, and we don't want to stigmatize him because he has a mental illness or whatever the case may be. You know, he slipped through the cracks, and it's an ugly thing that happened.
Well, the kid at Virginia Tech was another one who similar ilk that he slipped through the cracks as well. You're right. This kid in Buffalo definitely slipped through the cracks here. We should have kind of done that as a topic today instead of doing war, but yeah. It's kind of, I mean, I've seen the video and it's very, very hard to watch. Yeah, part of, unfortunately, the issue is that you have a lot of polarization going on, like you said. That's really part of the issue. You don't have a lot of open dialogue and a lot of people who are willing to listen to each other, young or old. Because there's young people that are completely staunch left and completely staunch right, and it's not where the future needs to be to get anything accomplished.
Well, I think if you want to go down that path, and is society different now, or is it just a mirage for me? I've said this over and over again, and Justin and I have talked about it. Jeremy and I have talked about it. I grew up in a world where I thought people disagreed about a lot of stuff. I feel this way, you feel that way, and we'd banter and we'd argue, and eventually there'd be some kind of agreement made in the political world to get somewhere. Nowadays, it's, if I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat, you're wrong, and I'm right. Or if I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican, you're wrong, and I'm right. People have gone from this is my opinion to this is, no matter what I think, fact. It doesn't matter whether it's right or not. If I state it, it must be fact. And this is not the, I don't feel like, and this is, me being the get off your lawn guy. Maybe I'm just sounding old, but I don't feel like I grew up in a world where everybody insisted that what they said was the fact, that they actually believed that they were sharing their opinions, and that they respected that the other person could share an opinion even if they completely disagreed with it, and they could have conversations.
Here I think is where you differ, and one of the key things you said was, if you're in a conversation with somebody, you say, this is how you feel, this is how I feel. There is no this is how you feel anymore. It's all this is how I feel. And that's to your point, and I heard somebody talking about an old way of arguing. I want to say it came out of the Jewish faith. It was somebody saying, like, whenever there was an argument, the two people, before they could really engage in a deep conversation, had to satisfactorily explain the position of the other person to that person. And then once they did that, then they could have a conversation. So, but to your point, like, nobody listens to the other side anymore, and it just shuts everything down.
This is where I disagree with my sons, because they're further left. There's no question about it. And it's their age group to a certain extent, although that would piss them off for me to say that in front of them. And I know, by the way, at some point my sons are going to go back and watch all this stuff and they're going to shoot me for all this, but they're only just now starting to emerge from the concept of everything they're saying is absolutely right and everything else. They look at, for instance, racial discrimination. If you feel a certain way, if you don't believe that absolutely every single person is equal, you just are wrong. And I'm not saying that their opinion's wrong. I think that I also happen to believe that anything in the discrimination category is terribly wrong and should be corrected. But it all comes from opinions, and they're still incapable of seeing that. They're still incapable, I think, not incapable, they're still struggling with the concept of seeing that that's how people were raised, and they need to be educated in a way that brings them to what the world should be in order to have true equality. They just get angry. They get and they won't listen to anyone. They won't listen. And this is the politics again. They won't listen to Mitch McConnell. They certainly won't listen to 45. Like literally, if it comes out of their mouths, it must be heresy and wrong. And we've lost that ability. They were horrified when I told them I watched every single day and minute of both political conventions in 2020. They were like, why would you do that? A lot of people have said that to me. Why would you do that? You're from the left side. Why would you watch the Republicans? It's all wrong, terrible stuff. I believe in know thine enemy, if you will.
Because you want to see how much of a snake in the grass the snake in the grass really is.
In order to understand how to have a discussion and bring someone toward your viewpoint, I believe you have to understand what makes them have their viewpoint. What's the history that makes them feel the way they do? And that's what I think has been terribly lost. And I haven't quite seen my sons embrace that yet. I think with everybody else, I think as you get older, you start to understand things like that. And I don't know if any of our kids are truly embracing that yet.
I don't think they have enough life experience yet to understand it.
Right.
I mean, when I was that age, I was practically a card-carrying Marxist. Now I'm pretty far on libertarian side. I mean, and that's what life experience has taught me, right? I mean, hey, when I read this stuff, it sounds really good, but in life, it doesn't work so well. But
exactly.
But to your point about understanding, when I think about democracy, democracy is one of those things where people have to talk. And you have to agree and you have to compromise and you kind of bring it to one side to the other. And things may shift a little bit, but they don't make these wide shifts. But people talk about it and they're able to agree on something at some level. That's what democracy is, to my belief, right? But I think we have really lost a lot of that, the conversations that go on. That's why we have the problems, I believe, is because everybody thinks they're right. And, when we want to bring this back to kind of war and some of the things that many people have died for is that freedom of speech, but not only freedom of speech to say something, I think that to carry that forward a little bit more, it's to be heard. It's for the voices who aren't being heard to be heard. That's the freedom of speech, right? I mean, that's why we want some people to have that ability to be heard. And a lot of times it's ugly speech. Right? We don't want to hear it, but I don't mean it's like Republican, Democrat. I mean it's really ugly things. Like I think one of the key cases was the Nazis in Chicago that won that right to have their protests or whatever. So that's ugly speech, right? But when everybody hears them talking, they immediately go, "These guys are crazy," right? But it's an interesting concept, the freedom of speech. But then people can talk about things that aren't popular, that aren't accepted.
I think in this country, it's more than accepted for people to talk about things that aren't popular and aren't accepted. It's growingly frustrating that people are talking things that they know are false just to push their own narrative, and that they know that are false, that are endangering people's lives. And that's where the topic of free speech gets very murky.
Yeah, but I think even with that stuff, I think you're talking about the disinformation stuff. When people talk about science, the way I learned about science is science evolves. Science is something that you incrementally move forward with, right? But whenever COVID came out, it's like science is, if they say this, we're going to reify that concept, and that is the truth with a capital T. But in reality, with a disease like COVID, or as it was when I went through it the first time with HIV, things emerge kind of slowly. Like we learn more and we learn more and we learn more about these things. So, I hate to say that shutting down people, because you can say something isn't true, but it might be. Now I get there's conspiracy theories. There's some some crazy stuff, but I felt like we really shut down a lot of like conversation. Again, I think it should have been scientific conversation, right? How do you move that forward without just shutting people down?
I actually watched a movie a couple of weeks ago, last week or 2 weeks ago, called Blinded by the Light. The movie is about a Pakistani young man who, at the time, it was 1980, 86, 87, 88, somewhere around there. A young Pakistani man in England. It's about his finding Bruce Springsteen, but it's not even an underlying story. It's part of the story is about the National Front riots in England during that time. National Front was basically a form of neo-Nazism that wanted to eradicate Pakistani people in England. So this has been going on and continues to go on, and probably will continue to go on for a very long time. You mentioned the Nazis in Chicago. I mean, there's kind of was a joke made about the Nazis in Chicago in the movie The Blues Brothers, but
Yeah.
it was part of the story.
Yeah.
Where they run them off the bridge, but the Nazis were part of that movie, which was hilarious. Who played the head Nazi guy in the movie? It was the short little old guy who was in The Burbs. So, unfortunately, these are things that bridges we're going to have to keep crossing with our children, because hate groups aren't going away. That's just the way it is. I mean, there's some, and we'll get into. We have certain topics coming up that we do need to discuss. We've been putting them off, and they do involve what could be construed as hate groups. You can't shy away from the fact that there's religious hate groups. There's all kinds of hate groups that cause these kind of havocs, sometimes portray some of these atrocities that happen, that lead us to war, that lead us to fighting. Sometimes they do lead to change as well, and sometimes that change isn't for the better. Sometimes it is. But we are going to keep seeing this. Unfortunately, we're never going to get rid of it, because there's people that are going to believe something, even if it's false. It's just the way it is. Not just in this country. You could tell somebody the sky is green, and somebody's going to believe it. So it's just the way it is. It's the way of the world, unfortunately. We're actually pushing pretty close to an hour here. Anybody have anything else they want to add before we wrap this up?
I think this would be a show that launches a whole bunch of other shows. We have definitely hit on a lot of topics for sure. But this is also one of those shows I'm worried that my kids will actually watch.
Well, then maybe you should open up a more of a dialogue, right? Or will it
Yes,
close it
I
down?
should.
That's the question. You can report back to us on that. But
I don't think that anything I've said in any of the shows would surprise them. It's interesting is for the positions that I think I've taken over the course of my life, they think that I am Mitch McConnell, put it that way. They probably wouldn't assign me further right than that, but they definitely put me in the right-hand side of the column, and I look at them like, the hell is wrong with you anyway? But that tells you where they are, and it's all a matter of perspective.
Right. All right. Yeah. So I just want to say that I think this thing with war and the kids, it's it's a hard thing. It's an ugly thing, and sometimes wars need to be fought. And I think that sometimes we go to war when we don't need to necessarily. It's for hidden or covert purposes. So But with what we got going on in Ukraine, you know, from the way I see it, it looks like Putin's going in trying to bully the Ukraine. And, you know, I think that's, like it or not, we kind of are the big brother to the world. So, and some people will talk bad about us and then ask for our help the next day. So that's interesting too, that whole thing. So.
Yeah, it happened in the early 2000s. You could go to a point of just kind of say, maybe we shouldn't have done X and we should have done Y.
Yeah.
I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We're still there. Doug, you got anything else you want to add?
No, just the kids are learning from us. So, you know, just got to watch ourselves when, you know, the family's around and what exactly we're doing, because they're picking up on all of it. But yeah.
As I said earlier, history is doomed to repeat itself. You have to change. But if you move a muscle, you can change a thought. So things can be done. Just a matter of finding out what the right thing to do is and doing it. Not the easiest task sometimes, but you got to do what you got to do. As I mentioned earlier, we are losing. We've lost significant amounts of veterans over the last few years. A lot of younger veterans we've lost, unfortunately, over the last few years to certain situations between addiction and the high rates of suicide amongst veterans. These are horrible times for our servicemen and women. These are rough times, and they've been rough times for a very long time, but it's only getting worse. We are actually going, my family and I are going on a cruise on Thursday. So what we would do next week would be, which we've done twice, is some variation of the Memorial Day show. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that. But I just wanted to say, of course, for those that are still with us, that may be listening or watching, I'd like to thank all the veterans for your service. And for those that we've lost, I know I've lost a couple of family members who, and my wife's lost a couple of family members who were in the military. My uncle was in Vietnam, so now unfortunately I never got to meet him. He was amongst the numbers that, but a very long time ago, 50 years ago, committed suicide. 40 almost 50 years ago. So just remember, please, what Memorial Day is about as we celebrate and honor during Memorial Day. So from all of us here at Dads on Life, except for Keith, who can eat my shorts, take care, everybody.
Cheers.
George Eaton, hold on. Wait a minute.
See you later.